Gotcha. We're good to go.
All right, thank you, Audrey. Good afternoon, morning, or wherever you happen to be on this planet. My name is Brock Young. It is my pleasure to be here. As we begin, I would actually ask you that you keep your cameras off. This is to prevent bandwidth issues on my end. However, feel free to come off mute and on camera when you do ask questions, but please hold all questions until prompted to ask. I know everybody's going to feel the itch to ask their questions right away into the comment box or the chat box, but I don't want to miss anything going forward and miss anything you may have had. A little more about my background. I am a retired active duty Army officer and 100% disabled veteran who participated in a federal SkillBridge internship with the San Francisco Federal Executive Board. For those in the audience that may be unfamiliar, SkillBridge is a DoD program that allows transitioning service members the ability to intern with a federal agency or civilian company at no cost to the organization for up to the last 180 days of active duty time. I know most of you on this call are probably already veterans out of the service, but I just wanted to capture that in case anybody on the call, for instance, Audrey and her team, in case they weren't aware of or were interested in the SkillBridge. The biggest part of the program is that it allows the program participants to be eligible for several special hiring authorities, which we will discuss later in this meeting. For those on the call, I also serve as the Western Region Federal Executive Board's Veteran Federal Employment Coordinator, where I conduct veteran and military spouse outreach, training like this, and events throughout the Western United States, as well as beyond for folks like Audrey that have a national reach. Our region consists of Alaska, Washington State, Idaho, Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, and the Pacific Territories. I also serve as the program specialist for the Oregon Federal Executive Board. For those of you who have never heard of the Federal Executive Boards, or FEBs, we work to link senior agency officials and build cooperative interagency relationships between federal, state, and local governments, as well as private stakeholders. My primary job is to assist agencies to find methods and ways to fix resource shortfalls, talent being one of them. In my position, I help federal partners fill priority vacancies and help veterans, transitioning service members, and military spouses learn to be more competitive when applying for those federal positions. In addition to offering this webinar, I facilitate the Veterans Federal Employment Collaborative, or VFEC, a national collaborative that focuses on connecting federal agencies and vacancies with qualified veterans, transitioning service members, and military spouses. The LinkedIn group will be shared at the end of this presentation for anyone interested. Now getting into it, and I'm going to come off camera because we're about to get going. One of the biggest things preventing talented people from becoming federal employees is their resume. That is why we're all here, after all, the federal resume. Think about the federal resume as an assessment of your writing abilities, research skills, and how well you follow instructions. But perhaps federal resume development isn't the right name for what we're trying to do here. Why? Because regular federal resumes won't get you interviews or your dream federal job. You're going to need more. You're going to put your resume on beast mode in order to set you apart from the hundreds, sometimes thousands of other applicants who are also competing for the same position. Never mind the remote jobs. If you're looking for that remote unicorn, then you'll not only be competing against greater numbers of applicants, but you will also be competing against time. Most remote announcements often close the same day they are posted because the agency has reached their application quota. This is an important point for everyone seeking a federal career, remote or not. An increasing number of non-remote announcements are also beginning to limit their application quotas. We will discuss best practices that can help you overcome these challenges in this presentation as well. Finding and securing a federal career or your dream position is a process. Some have called it a job in itself. We're all here to help you prepare your resume so that when opportunities pop up, you'll be ready to take advantage of them. Besides the federal resume, how else can you prepare? Well, ask yourself, how are you getting hold of announcements that you are interested in or qualified for? Do you have a USA Jobs search saved? Do you have it sent to you daily? Are you looking for that remote unicorn? If so, are you applying for jobs in the morning or evening? All of these things need to be considered and are important. Why? Because you can't tailor a resume for a dream job if the announcement to that dream job closed that morning and you lost your opportunity and chance to apply. Diving right in, we'll talk about what we will cover by first touching on what we won't be covering. Next, we will discuss the federal resume, dispel some myths, and cover a broad overview of the resume development process. We will then dive into building your federal resume. This will include sources you can and should get information from, different formats, required and optional sections, etc. Next, we'll discuss what specialized experience, competencies, and the assessment questionnaire are and how you can and should tailor your resume to them. We will then talk about methods of wordsmithing and adding context to your experience. Then we will go into translating your experience, which is really important for those looking to change agencies or job series or the veterans on the call. Finally, we will go over some closing tips and additional resources. Again, please hold all of your questions until given the opportunity to ask them. I don't want to miss something that you put into the comments section early in the presentation. Because of this, we will have a longer Q&A session at the end for any questions that I didn't answer during the presentation. About midway through, we will pause for a short 5-minute bathroom break, and then we'll dive right into the final half of our presentation. I don't want to spend time with things you may know or on questions that already have excellent resources to answer. USA Jobs and the Office of Personnel Management have a great series of videos explaining how to use the system, apply to jobs, as well as answer other questions that you might have about the technical side of the process. It's a simple web search to find the USA Jobs YouTube channel. As many sitting here know, there are a ton of myths about the federal resume and the federal the federal hiring process that discourage people from applying to federal positions or from applying for a promotion within another agency. Before we get into how to build your federal resume, let's dispel some myths about it. The first myth is first because it's one I run into most frequently. A federal resume should not exceed 2 pages. Incorrect. A federal resume requires more information than a corporate resume, therefore will almost always be longer than 2 pages. We will go in depth on things that must be included in your federal resume later in this presentation. You'll hear me say this many times during this presentation. Make sure you pay attention to and read the entire announcement. Some agencies have page limits, DHS and FEMA, for instance. Absent that, your resume needs to be as long as it needs to be in order for you to show you have the qualifications and experience the agency requires. The next myth is that jobs that close before the closing date means the agency had someone in mind, which caveats into another myth. You have to know someone to get a federal job or be promoted. The truth is, job announcements that close before the closing date do so because the agency has received their limit of applications. Many announcements contain a statement below the open and closing dates that read to the effect of, this job will close when we have received 2,500, 200 applications, which may be sooner than the closing date. Agencies are doing this because they know they're going to be inundated with applications and there are only so many HR reviewers to go around. As for needing to know someone to get a federal job, no, you don't. If you are qualified for a federal position, you can write a competitive federal resume. Make sure you add as much context and detail when describing your knowledge, skills, and accomplishments in your resume and answer the assessment questionnaire, giving yourself all the credit you can. You have to apply correctly following the directions. You can get best qualified and referred to a supervisor without knowing anyone in the government. Another myth, you must move to Washington, D.C. if you want to work for the federal government or get a promotion. Here's the fact. Only about 15% of federal jobs are in Washington, D.C. or the D.C. metro area, while approximately 83% are found in multiple locations throughout the country, with a remaining 2% outside of the United States. Though, for full disclosure, some agencies would like you to move to D.C. to do a rotation through their headquarters for development and promotion purposes, but this isn't all of them. We have another big and pervasive myth that federal resumes are scanned for keywords by an automated system. I need to say this, no, no, no. Real people, living human resources specialists will be the ones who review, rate, and score your resume. The only truly automated portion of the process is you filling out your USA Jobs information and self-assessment. The next myth applies to both current federal employees and the veterans listening. And it's the myth that HR specialists will know what you did in your current agency or role or while you were in the military. The fact is, no, they will not. It's important that everyone listening to me understands this. Whether you're moving offices, agencies, or if you're a veteran or transitioning service member, when developing your federal resume, you need to translate your skills and experience into terms the HR specialist at the agency you're applying to understands. Don't assume the reviewer knows what job duties entailed, what skills or competencies you demonstrated, just because you currently happen to have a similar job title or series. Another myth I hear frequently from transitioning service members is the myth that those retiring from active duty have to wait 180 days to get a federal job. Wrong again. For those who may be retiring from the active duty military, the 180-day employment restriction only applies to military retirees, which includes those who are medically retired, and only for certain DoD locations and positions. So before you turn your back on DoD agencies, make sure you know the facts. There are careers, job series, locations, etc., that aren't included in this restriction. But even if you're looking at one of those jobs that may be restricted, there is a waiver process. If the agency likes you and wants you, they'll push for the waiver. Another myth is a big one, and the myth is that military and civilian experience are different. Let me say this and say this forcefully. All professional experience is experience. Where you got it doesn't matter. You want to express that you have the specialized experience the agency is looking for. Saying that the experience was gained in the military makes them think your experience is limited only to that and doesn't translate. Finally, another myth that I run into frequently is that you can't work for the federal government if you have a criminal record. This is not so. People with criminal records are eligible to compete for a vast majority of federal jobs. During the hiring process, federal agencies are generally required to consider people with criminal records if they are among the highest rated candidates and can comply with the job requirements. There are, of course, some exceptions because of specific laws, statutes that prohibit employment depending on the crime committed, etc. For example, certain federal laws, like those prohibiting treason, carry with them a lifelong ban on federal employment. I would like to begin with this disclaimer. Everything we will discuss here is a way of doing things. Like most things, there's no single the way to complete a federal resume. This isn't to scare you, just manage expectations. Some agencies like longer resumes, some require a resume of a certain length. Some like narratives instead of bullets, but most will accept either. What we will discuss today are best practices that have generally been shown to work across the federal government. Bottom line up front, your federal resume is your federal job application. It conveys your work history and experience to a potential employer. It is used to determine minimum qualifications as well as to determine the best and most qualified candidates. It can be unlimited in length unless specified by the agency, but again, a good rule to follow is your federal resume needs to be as long as it needs to be in order for you to get the job. Finally, the rule is if it's not in your resume, it doesn't count. Don't worry, I'll foot stomp this one a couple more times during this presentation. The federal resume is your first and potentially only opportunity to impress the hiring manager. Your resume is the best method to market yourself to potential employers. It must clearly articulate how you not only meet the minimum qualifications, but how you are the best and most qualified candidate for the role. It must include examples of how, when, and where you used the competency or skill. If it's not in your resume, it doesn't matter. Again, this is a big one. No one will assume what you did. You have to be clear about expressing what skills and competencies you demonstrated in the positions you did them. And when developing your federal resume, don't just go for the minimum qualifications. You want to add the context, detail, and metrics to get you rated as either very highly qualified, which means you exceeded the minimum qualifications, or best qualified, which means you substantially exceeded the minimum qualifications. This is how you get hired. Finally, read the fine print. Some agencies have different requirements like page length, if they accept non-USA job systems resumes, the required date format, etc. Always read the entire announcement. No matter what recommendations you hear from me today or in general, again, always default to what the announcement is asking for. A federal resume must be written and tailored to the announcement and show specific and relevant accomplishments and information. Relevant equals experience, knowledge, skills, and or training that applies to the job you're applying to. If it's not relevant, leave it out. There is a reason this gets its own slide. I know that when I started this process way back in 2020, I included everything I did when I was in the service, no matter how small. While much of it could be seen as relevant, there was plenty that was not because of the career fields or professional experience level I was applying to. For instance, a federal agency won't care that I got my entire platoon to pass a physical fitness test at one point. Many of you out there that are transitioning service members or veterans understand how significant and what an accomplishment this is, but a federal HR person won't. But don't discount your experiences and achievements just because they appear irrelevant on the surface. Look deeper at what you did and adjust the context of your experience to include how you accomplished the task and what competencies you demonstrated while doing it. To get the achievement above, I had to use computers to develop training plans. I had to hold my employees accountable. I had to find ways to motivate them through leadership, which ultimately shows how I achieved the success. That is what a hiring manager wants to see. Having discussed what should be in your federal resume, let's take a moment to touch on the things that you cannot have in your federal resume. For federal resumes, you do not want to include things like photographs or videos of yourself, or any sensitive information or PII like age, date of birth, marital status, protected health information, religious affiliation, which is a complicated one, and I get questions about. I will address this later, or your social security number, or even having SSN colon XXX, XXX, XXX. Don't want anything like that there in your resume. This also includes your LinkedIn or other social media profile links. Why? What's typically the first thing that pops up on a social media profile? Your picture. If you include any of this, your application will most likely be removed from consideration. Now that you've decided to apply and build your federal resume, you need to build it and actually apply. But before you put pen to paper, like any project, you need to get all of the information ready. What information? Previous job descriptions and announcements are a good place to find experience and what you did. For the veterans and or transitioning service members, in addition to your joint service transcript, you can also use your VMET or verification of military experience and training. Additional places to get information for your resume include annual performance evaluations, end of course evaluations, course syllabus, etc. And don't forget any awards you received. Those should definitely go into your resume. As discussed, one place to find excellent information is your joint service transcript. It explains in civilian terminology what you did. Here's an example from my own background and JST. You will see that there are some militaryisms or jargon. You do have to still tweak it a little bit when using this method. Again, evaluations are a great place to find achievements, but for those with military experience, you also have to be sure to rewrite your experiences in civilian terms. And don't forget your volunteer experiences. They are an important, often overlooked, and almost always under-detailed section that could add a lot to your resume. Volunteer experience is any unpaid experience you might have. While this includes work done through national service programs, it also includes work for community-based, philanthropic, and social organizations like churches, schools, etc. Now, let me touch on something real quick. May it sound like I contradicted myself when earlier I said you cannot have religious affiliation in your resume, and yet here I'm saying that you should include volunteer experience with a church. Again, what did I just say? You are not saying that it's your church. You simply are saying you have volunteer experience with a specific church. So avoid using terminology that includes, this is my church, this is my people, this is what I do, etc. But if you did something for the local Lutheran church, you did something for the local Lutheran church. Absolutely, you want to include that. This also includes involvement in programs like the FFA or 4-H or other programs with your child's schools or booster clubs. Additionally, you want to highlight projects like speaking engagements or if you have writing credits. And don't forget any professional academic challenges or successes you had while in college. Finally, don't discount the experience, knowledge, and skills you might have demonstrated outside of a normal career or job. As a stay-at-home parent or caregiver, you routinely provide services and demonstrate skills that translate directly to your federal resume. Up front, and my agency doesn't like me saying this, but tough, I personally don't like the USA Jobs Resume Builder because it's not as flexible as using a Word file, but it does get the job done. If you want to use something else, there are a bunch of templates out there if you look online. When considering a format to use, I recommend you find a format that allows you to best convey your information. But keep in mind that your resume still has to be clear and easy to read for the federal HR specialist who will review, rate, and score your resume. If you still need one, feel free to reach out to me following this webinar, and I will send you the format that I use and recommend. Federal resumes do not need to be flashy. I recommend you keep your resume font the same font size, type, and color throughout. It should be black in color, 11 to 12 point, Arial, Times New Roman, or Garamond fonts. You can use capitalizations, bold print, and italics for subheaders and to highlight information. Things like text boxes, colors, and tables can actually take away from what you're trying to convey, and that is your experience. Additionally, these things can cause issues if someone exports your resume from PDF to Word or vice versa. USA Jobs does a good job of laying out the basic requirements for a federal resume. From the site, a federal resume must include your contact information, what I also refer to as the introduction, your work experience that must include start and end dates, as well as hours worked per week. This is what makes it a federal resume. Education is a tricky one. Make sure you read the announcement to understand whether education will be a major factor or not in determining if you are qualified. But for those of you that may not have a full degree yet, don't shortchange yourself. Many jobs are looking for experience and transferable skills that are communicated in the resume. Although it is always good to address education on the resume, you need to be conscious of whether that will be a deciding factor or not, so you don't have to be as detailed if it isn't. As stated in the previous slide, you want to include any relevant volunteer experience, and don't forget to include any academic awards, achievements, or memberships you might have. Finally, though not something from USA Jobs, I recommend including at least 3 professional references if you have the room. Your federal resume should also include relevant training, certifications, or schooling you've completed. There's that word again, relevant. Agencies don't care about your professional training or certifications unless that training or certification applies to what they're looking for. And when it comes to military schools, they typically won't know that it's relevant unless you tell them. That's why you may have to include a short summary of what you learned, the competencies required to graduate, etc. Your contact information should be current. Your address is a tricky one. Make sure you pay attention to the entire announcement because some agencies actually consider full street address PII and will indicate it on the announcement. The telephone number you include should be the one you are most likely to answer and have a voicemail enabled in case you missed the call. When it comes to email addresses, you want an email address that you can carry with you after you leave college, the service, or your current federal position. This includes not using your agency email address, .mil or .edu emails. For current federal employees, I strongly recommend you not use your agency email address. Why? Because you don't want to run afoul of any restrictions against seeking employment while on duty. As an example, this is my introduction section. You see here that I hit all of the requirements, but also put my own shine on it by adding the job number and title of the position I'm applying for. This requires me to change at least one thing on every resume I tailor. For those new to the federal hiring system, there are many special hiring authorities that you can use that can give you a head start when applying. For veterans, when it comes to your resumes, veterans preference and special hiring authorities are two separate things and serve two different purposes. I will discuss these more towards the end of the presentation. Language proficiency levels are good to include if relevant to the position you're applying for. If you want to put them, I recommend you use the State Department's definitions, which are commonly understood across the federal government. Current and/or active duty clearances actually aren't that important when it comes to applying for federal jobs, since nearly every agency will reinvestigate you as part of their onboarding process. Including your clearance and adjudication date shows the agency that they shouldn't have any issues when and if you are reinvestigated by their organization. Again, make sure you read the fine print of the announcement and include everything they want to see and nothing they don't. Are there any questions about the introduction section or what we've covered at this time? I got one hand. Troy, go ahead. Troy?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Hello? Oh, my apologies. My mic was mute. So my question is, I'm 20 years retired, and I have a strong finance background and intel. Well, finance and some logistics. Now, when I applied to USA Jobs, should I add the logistics in there? You know, as far as keep it in my resume, or should I just take that out?
Is it relevant? Well, we'll get more into that later, but here's the biggest question we've hit on a couple times. Is it relevant to the job you're applying to?
For some contracting jobs, it may be because I have the finance portion, and then it would have the logistics where I'm dealing with contracts.
And that will be defined if it's defined and stated in the announcement and supplemental questionnaire. Absolutely, then it is relevant. But for instance, my background, I started infantry, went military police, became an officer, went human resources. So if I'm applying to a human resources job, my door kicker, all that door kicker experience probably doesn't apply. And same thing, if you are applying to strictly an accounting or finance position and, planning movements, hauling equipment, logistical stuff doesn't apply to that job, then leave it out.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So that portion, but should I still add the logistics part, even though I'm dealing with numbers and contracts to kind of support the finance portion of it?
I can't answer that fact without looking. I can't answer that without seeing the announcement of what they're asking for. But again, the bottom line is, if you can't directly associate what you're adding to your resume to something that's in the announcement or supplemental questionnaire, it's not relevant.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Cool.
Yes, that's fine.
Anybody else? All right, moving on. Now it's time to get into the meat of the resume, your work experience. Think of your federal resume as a test, the first of several challenges you need to overcome in order to become a federal employee. Every test has questions, and understanding those questions can be key to passing or failing. For federal resumes, the test questions are made up of specialized experience, competencies, required training, if applicable, and the assessment questionnaire. First, without the required specialized experience as defined in the announcement, it is unlikely that you will be determined as qualified and referred to the hiring manager. The book definition of specialized experience is a type of work experience that is directly related to and relevant to the position which you are applying. Next, sections in the job announcements that refer to how you will be qualified and evaluation factors and competencies are telling you the metrics that the federal agency are going to use to grade your resume. When grading, the agency will determine how well your resume describes how, when, how often you use the competencies the agency is looking for within the context of your experience. Next, you need to ensure you have any required courses or training, again, if applicable. This section includes any special or specific schooling, education course requirements, certifications, etc. Finally, the assessment questionnaire selections you make should accurately describe your training and experience carrying out the task. We will go into each of these in detail, But before we do, let's talk about some generalities and requirements that make a resume a federal resume. Here is where many people derail themselves when applying to federal jobs. They leave off things that are required in a federal resume. When developing a federal resume, each professional experience must include your job title, your employer's name, start and end dates in the position. Now, this is one of those reasons I'm not a fan of USA Jobs Resume Builder. The system will only allow you to put month and year for your start and end dates, but some agencies want to see month, day, and year, and will toss your resume if you don't have them. Again, remember to read the entire announcement. Next, you must include average hours worked per week. I will discuss this more in a few moments, but without the average hours worked per week, along with the start and end dates of employment, a federal HR reviewer cannot determine your qualifications. Failing to include the dates and hours worked is one of the fastest ways I've seen to get an email stating you are ineligible because you do not possess the specialized experience required for this position. For current or prior federal employees, you'll want to include your federal grade, series, and step. Finally, you need to include the supervisor's name and phone number for each position. Don't be afraid to put no or contact me first as to whether or not the agency can contact your supervisor, but be prepared to answer why. The same goes for a company that may have closed or the supervisor no longer works there or retired. Just note it and move on. But before we move on, some may wonder why salary isn't a requirement. To be honest, it might be. So again, always read the entire announcement. However, for your own knowledge, the federal government has determined and is moving away from using salary as a metric for hiring. Using this example from my resume, as a federal employee, I include both my pay band, series, grade, and step. As discussed on the previous slide, changes to the hiring process has made salary no longer a consideration to determine qualifications. Since this is a federal position, I make sure to include this is a federal position statement. Note, for the purposes of federal resumes, military service and government contracting positions are not considered federal positions. Another example from my resume, notice that I don't have this is a federal position statement. Again, this is because even though you might have been on active duty or active duty military, you are not considered a federal employee when it comes to federal hiring. This example shows how you can add part-time civilian, FEMA reservist, or military reservist and/or National Guard positions that run concurrent with your full-time job. Remember, the hours per week information here is considered typical and should be an average of the hours per week you worked based on a typical month. To manage expectations, it doesn't need to be 100% exact. For this example, since I was AGR, or Active Guard Reserve at the time, which means I also had a part-time National Guard position, with duties and responsibilities far different than my full-time position. Because I was active duty, I didn't get paid for my end-day job. So I wanted to make sure the agency knows it by showing that this position was unpaid. For those who may have been activated, put on orders for an extended period of time, etc., I recommend you include those as achievements in your experience, or if deployed for an extended period of time, make that deployment a separate experience section. It's up to you on how you want to do this or what your time threshold might be. But for me, I would make a completely new experience block if something was 6 to 9 months or more. What are your questions on this part or what we've discussed so far? All right, seeing none. But how do you locate the specialized experience within the announcement? Most USA Jobs webinars and classes will explain what is meant by specialized experience, so I'm not going to go too in depth on this one. Here are some examples from this particular announcement. But I want everybody to take a look at the first line on the page. You must have 1 year of specialized experience equivalent to at least the next lower grade, in this case, GS 11. This means your resume must not only show you have the experience that the agency is looking for at the grade you're applying to, but must also show you would have met the time and grade requirements for the next lower grade. How do you make sure you're meeting this requirement? By ensuring your entire resume, to include past positions, is tailored to the announcement. Neglecting this is the reason most people receive those do not meet the minimum requirements for this position emails. I'll discuss this more in a moment. Remember this first specialized experience? You must have 1 year of specialized experience at a level of difficulty and responsibility equivalent to GS11 in this case, grade level in the federal service. This is where most people fail to add the required detail because they spend all of their time writing their current position and then neglect to ensure all of their past positions show the applicable growth and qualifications required by the announcement. Many announcements will lay out what experience at the next lower level looks like, but many don't. This means researching what experience looks like at the next lower level. The Office of Personnel Management has an entire library on competencies and skills at various levels and within certain series. You can also gain insight from looking at lower level positions within the same agency and job series while on USA Jobs. The slide here shows an example of how to show progression in your resume. Back to the must-have 1 year of specialized experience. How do you make sure you have this requirement or meet this requirement? By making sure your employment dates are correct. All computations of your work experience start with the dates you were in the position. Without knowing how many weeks per year and hours per week you did something, a federal HR specialist cannot determine your qualifications, and you will be removed from consideration. If in the federal government, 52 weeks is an important benchmark. For Fed HR folks, 52 weeks of experience equals 52 35 to 40-hour work weeks. This is why the reviewing HR professionals need to know your employment dates, your exact employment dates. Don't think you're getting away with anything by only putting month and year for your employment dates. Putting January 2020 to December 2020 on your resume will not get you assessed at 52 weeks. It will only get you assessed at 44. Why? Because federal HR personnel default your start date to the last date of the month and your end date to the first date. So by putting January 2020 to December 2020, you basically put down January 31st to December 1st, which equals 44 weeks. Even if you left mid-month, you want to get credit for the time you worked. Which brings us to hours worked per week. In order for you to be assessed as having 52 weeks time and grade, or 52 weeks of experience, they, the federal HR folks, need to know how many hours a week you worked. Again, the federal government has determined full-time means 35 to 40 hours a week. Putting anything less means your experience won't be graded as full-time. But what about putting more than 40 hours a week? If your normal duties require you to work more than 40 hours a week, on occasion, say so, but say it is an achievement, not a normal thing. Why? Because we understand you may have worked 60 hours a week, but what were you scheduled to work? If under 60 hours a week, put what you should have been working and then put as a bullet how you routinely worked additional hours in order to ensure the success of the organization's mission, or something similar. Back to the example. What if you don't have 52 weeks of required experience, like in the first example on the left? Here we see the applicant will only get credit for 24 weeks of experience, but needs 52 weeks of experience in one of the specialized experiences. For many of us, we often do similar things in every job. You may have, for instance, conducted quarterly performance evaluations in multiple positions, or maybe use certain management skills or technical or computer skills. It's important to include what you did in every experience that you did it. It doesn't matter if you duplicate the experience bullets if you did it in that experience. If you did something in more than one experience period, include it in both. By including conducted quarterly performance evaluations in both of these positions, this resume would get assessed as having 104 weeks of experience. If you're shooting for more than just meeting the minimum qualifications, This is how you do it. But what about part-time and volunteer work? Well, for those who have significant part-time or volunteer experience, for instance, the military spouses and those who are or were stay-at-home parents or caregivers, it's important to understand how the federal government computes your qualifications so that you can perform a self-assessment and determine if you are qualified before spending hours tailoring a resume and submitting it just to have them tell you what you could have already known. How? With these two equations. Excuse me. First, take your hours worked per week and divide them by 40. This will give you your employment percentage. Next, take the number of months in your position and multiply that by the employment percentage. You will get your months of credited experience. Let's take this example. Glenda has been working for the last 2 years or the last 24 months as a part-time customer service representative working 10 hours a week. How many months of experience can she be credited? Well, using the equation from the last slide, we can find out. Taking the 10 hours a week she worked and dividing that by 40 gives us the employment percentage as 0.25 or 25%. And multiply that here by the employment percentage of 25%. Excuse me. Now we take the 24 months she worked and multiply that by her employment percentage of 25% in order to get 6 months of experience that can be credited. Why is this important to know? Because based on what we see here, if an agency was looking for someone with 12 months or 52 weeks of customer service experience, Glenda would need to show another 6 months of specialized experience somewhere else in her resume, or she will be found as not qualified for the position. Again, using these simple equations, you can quickly figure out roughly how many months of experience you have so that you're not spending hours tailoring a resume for a position you may not even be qualified for. Are there any questions? I see Troy, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a question, and correct me if I'm wrong. So when you're applying for the federal agency and like USA Jobs, and they're looking at it, and your whole background is active duty, shouldn't it kind of be like automatic that they know active duty is full time?
Yeah, not if you don't put 40 hours down. You're remember what I said earlier. They will not assume anything. If it's not in your resume, it didn't happen. If you don't have hours worked per week, you will not be assessed and not be found as qualified. That's the bottom line.
Even if you're, and I'm not talking reserve, I'm talking like
No,
straight like active duty. Really?
exactly. The requirement is hours per week.
Okay, I mean, I found that kind of, I have it on mine. I was just kind of curious because, I mean, if somebody's on active duty, you're in the military 24/7, 365. Like it's no days off.
I get that, man. I was active duty as well. The requirement, learn the task to pass the class, man. The requirement is add hours per week. They will assume nothing.
Okay, got it.
Anybody else? All right. Now moving into the body of your experience sections. Let's start with the recommended format. There are several ways to build a resume. However, the one we'll discuss here is the same one used by USA Jobs, the reverse chronological order format. This has your most recent experience first and then works backwards. As a general rule, your resume should cover the last 10 years of work experience, but this is only a recommendation. If you can show you have the experience and qualifications in the last 5 years of work experience, then only go back 5. You need to go back farther than 10 years to show you have the qualifications, do so. For the veterans in the audience, again, it is a myth that military and civilian experience are different. You want to express that you have the specialized experience required by an announcement. Saying that the experience was gained in the military makes the HR specialist or hiring manager think your experience is limited only to that. You want the agency to know you have the experience they're looking for. Where you got it doesn't matter. This includes part-time and unpaid experiences as well. It is especially important to add part-time and volunteer experience when your part-time or unpaid gig requires you to demonstrate vastly different skills and competencies than your full-time job. You want to get credit for what you did. And again, if it's not in your resume, it didn't happen. Finally, when writing your experiences, my recommendation is for you to decide what works best for you. You can use bullets or narratives, but as with most things, make sure you read the announcement in case the agency wants something different. The best way to write your federal resume is the way that most effectively and clearly allows you to convey your information, knowledge, skills, and experience and competencies to the HR reviewer and hiring manager. And that way may be different for everyone here. Before we go into detail on methods of writing quality experience bullets, let's talk some generalities. Some solid federal resumes are about three things: detail, detail, and detail. Your experiences need to include examples of what you managed, did, or tasks you completed, not what you were responsible for or assisted with. Your resume needs to describe the scope of your duties, how many people you supervised, how much money you managed, including examples when and where you can. Your results should include relevant examples of your accomplishments, awards, and recognition you earned, as well as details and a summary of why you earned them. Try to use quantifiable metrics whenever possible. For instance, improved X% by Y% within Z months. What's the word I've used there a couple times? That's right, examples. If you're not going to give examples of how, where, and when you used a competency or skill, you might as well not even include that competency or skill in your resume. The experiences and examples in your resume need to paint a clear picture about how, when, and where you gained the experience and meet the qualifications the announcement is looking for. Human resources reviewers and hiring managers probably don't know what was involved in a project, task, or process, and they definitely won't make assumptions about your experience. When writing out your experiences, think implied versus specified. The best answer is you must specify everything, even the things you believe that are in the implied category. What do I mean by implied versus specified? Let's look at the example of taking out the garbage. Specified task, take out the garbage. As we know, or anybody with children know, there are several implied tasks here. Implied with that would be remove the bag from the bin, go outside, and identify a problem. Kid's car is parked in front of the garbage can. So now explain how you utilized a cell phone, contacted and verbally communicated with the individual, laying out a course of action that solved the problem and allowed you to put the bag in the proper garbage can, proper demonstrating that you have an attention to detail, where you then return to the house, closing the front door and placing a new bag in the bin. When describing what you did, you need to be as clear and detailed as possible. You can do this by avoiding terms like helped with, worked on, or assisted with, or I have experience with, or I have knowledge of. Instead, clearly explain what you did, what tasks you completed, and were those tasks key to the successful completion of the mission? Did you improve anything, change anything, better anything? What specific skills, abilities, and/or attributes did you employ to complete the task? What equipment or software did you use? You want to avoid terms like responsible for and served as, because they don't tell the hiring manager what you did or achieved. And if you think about it, people are responsible for all kinds of stuff they didn't actually complete or do. Instead of responsible for, try managed or completed, or similar action verbs that embody initiative. And don't just say major duties included or currently I am working on, because as discussed above, statements like these assume the reviewer knows what your duties entailed and what skills or competencies you demonstrated. They won't. And don't just include how, when, and where, but also include the skills used. Maybe you used a skill like oral communication. If you did, make sure to state whether or not you expressed information to individuals or groups effectively and your presentations were clear and convincing. Why? Because that is what the definition of oral communication is asking for. Don't just say written communication or has written communication skills. But include whether or not you have been recognized for writing in a clear, concise, organized, and convincing manner for the intended audience, which ties it back to the OPM competency definition, which I will discuss here shortly. In describing what you did, don't just say you worked with computers, but include if you use Microsoft Office Suite software such as Excel, PowerPoint, spreadsheets, etc., as well as how often, daily, weekly, routinely, as part of your job. All federal career seekers should avoid using jargon. For current federal employees, it's important to avoid agency or specific jargon when you're applying to another office or agency. For our veterans and transitioning service members out there, avoiding jargon means writing in civilian language and avoiding militarism. You need to translate those things to something that agencies, HR reviewers, and managers understand. I've stated it before and will again several more times. You want the agency to know your experience is experience. Where you got it doesn't matter. This is the same with acronyms. Use them sparingly, if at all, and always spell them out at least once. Finally, when it comes to numbers, I recommend either spelling out or writing out all of the zeros. For instance, 35 million with 6 zeros has more of a wow effect than just 35. Before we go into detail on how to find the specialized experience, competencies, etc., and then what to do, let's take a moment to touch on a couple of techniques to help capture and articulate your experience to maximize the effect. If you want to format your bullets or narratives to help add context to your experience, use the STAR method as a template or as close as you can. Doing this not only gives you a strong format for your experience, but it will give you practice for your future interviews, where the STAR method is the recommended method of answering the behavioral and situational interview questions you will face. So it's a good habit to start writing and speaking in those terms now. STAR stands for S, situation or background. This sets the broader context. T is the task, problem to solve, challenge, goal to reach, or task to complete. This adds more focused context for the reader. A is for the actions you took. This can include any steps taken to complete or achieve the goal, the skills used, and or an explanation of your process. R is the results, or the so what behind the bullet. The result can include how you contributed to the team, how the team benefited, or how you improved your organization, how you used or developed a process, or what important lessons learned or skills gained through the outcome. Again, the result should include as many metrics as possible. Here we have an example of using the STAR method to develop a resume bullet. Give everybody a second to read that, guy.
Brock, we may also have a question. Looks like Troy has his hand up.
Oh yeah, I saw it. I was going to wait until I got to a question spot. But go ahead, Troy.
So in regards to what you're talking about, right? And so my question is mostly based off as far as length and your experience. So for somebody that has like 20 plus years inside the military, and they're having their resume, where should we stick to as far as the page count? Because I know you can condense some things, but let's say a company's looking for 10 plus years of experience. Now you're going into a possibility you're going to have more than 2 pages worth of experience, inside your resume. So how can you kind of, tailor your resume towards that, towards though you don't have something lengthy, towards though when HR sees it, they're like, okay, I'm not trying to read 5-6 resume. I mean, 5-page resume.
Okay, so time out real quick. If you're submitting a 2-page resume for a federal job, you're not going to get hired. Bottom line.
Okay, all right. That's what I just needed to confirm.
Automatically, anybody who graduated high school and volunteered, maybe played a sport and volunteered for their the student council, their resume will be more than 3 pages long. So that's the bottom line. Not to scare you, my master resume, the thing that I have, all of my experience, all of my background, doesn't matter what, whether it's operations, emergency management, human resources, everything in my master federal resume is 34 pages long. When I submit it to a job, I will tailor it down. It's usually to about the 8 to 12 page range, depending on the level of detail and experiences that the job is looking for.
Okay.
I just haven't looked for jobs that only require 5 pages, but you need to be prepared to boil it down to 5 pages if that's what the agency is requiring.
Understood. Now, should I in regards to that, should I, and I hate to assume, but I know a lot of companies, they would kind of, go to your your LinkedIn page. So let's say my resume is like six almost 7 pages. So when I do that, should I just, and I'll tailor it and I'll get it down to condense to where it's those 5, but should I also have it to where as though when they look on my LinkedIn page, they'll see like everything in there as well?
I've already said it once. If your social media profiles on your in your federal resume, unless the agency is asking for it, it will be removed from consideration. So an agency will not go to your LinkedIn page unless they seek you out on their own. If you include your LinkedIn file in your resume, it will remove from consideration because it is a requirement or is a prohibited item to include in your resume. For instance, pictures of yourself, PII. What's the first thing that pops up when they open your LinkedIn profile?
Right. Okay.
Your picture. So if an agency does look at your LinkedIn page, they will do so on their own. They will seek you out on their own, but that's not something you're going to volunteer unless, again, the agency is asking for it. If you include that, the agency doesn't ask for it, you're violating prohibited information, including your resume, and you'll be removed from consideration.
Okay.
All right, moving on. Before we move into the learning about the specialized experience, some of you may be wondering, what about the personal summaries, objective statements, lists of technical skills, achievements, core competencies, etc.? I know there's a lot of templates out there that show these. I was actually using it for myself for a little bit. I've since stopped. Cutting right to it, nothing you include in a list of skills or in your summary or objective statement will count towards assessing your qualifications and qualifying your resume. I need to say that again. Nothing you include in a list of skills or in your summary statement or objective statement will count towards assessing your qualifications. Even though many templates and examples you see have lists of skills, competencies, and or achievements, don't think you're going to be able to hit the easy button and put all of your required competencies into one of these lists and have it count towards qualifying your resume. Even if you're using one of these templates, make sure you're including and mentioning everything you have in these sections in your experience section with examples, metrics, context, and results. Describe how you use the programmer skill, in what environment, how often, if you were considered an expert or not. Did people come to you for advice on these matters or competencies? Were the reports you wrote for managers or senior executives? Were those reports used to make decisions? If you would like to include one of these summaries in your resume, keep the 3 to 5 sentences. Think of it like a smaller, more focused cover letter, giving the hiring manager some information that may not necessarily be relevant to the announcement, but something you feel they should know. Your experience section is important. When your experiences are connected to dates and hours worked per week, this information is not. And again, anything you put into this section will not count towards qualifying your experience and resume. Now, by a quick show of virtual hands, who has heard that you should copy and paste all of the specialized experience and specialized and required experience, competencies, and keywords into your resume so that the scanning software will pick it up? Maybe you've been told to hide this info in white font so the hiring manager won't see it. Maybe something like this. Who's heard of that? Couple? Yeah, couple. Well, this is a trick people are told to use that will get around the scanning resume software many companies or hiring websites use. That may work with corporate hiring, but again, federal agencies don't use scanning software to review and score your resume. A living person does it. And it's important to understand that if and when they see something like this, opposed to you showing how, where, and when you have the relevant experience that they're looking for, it is highly unlikely that your resume will be rated as qualified, and it's near impossible to imagine your resume will be referred. And yes, this is actually taken from a resume I reviewed. So this is legit. Somebody actually tried doing that. So now that we have an idea about what makes, how to make sure our dates are correct and why, as well as how to show context within our experience using the STAR method, let's take a look at how to use the specialized experience in the announcement to add even more clarity to our resume bullets and narratives. Let's take the specialized experience, preparing presentations, white papers, and reports for personnel of all levels. Think about your own work experience for a moment, and see if you can come up with a potential resume bullet. How can you use this specialized experience to add clarity to your resume? By using the terms, keywords, and information in the specialized experience to craft a bullet that is specific to you. Take a moment and read this example. From this bullet, we see the applicant has addressed preparing presentations, how often they did it, as well as the levels that they presented to. The applicant explained what systems or applications they used, as well as how they both wrote and verbally briefed the information. From this bullet, I see the person has technical competence, experience with oral and written communication, experience using Microsoft Office products, as well as experience speaking to employees, managers, and executives. It's important to understand that you can and should use the terminology, keywords, etc., from the specialized experience in your bullet, but don't simply cut and paste the information into your resume. Your bullet will lack context and how it applies to you. Though this is a strong bullet, there is something very important missing. What is it? Drop your answers into the chat bar. No one? All right.
We don't see the example on our end, so.
Oh, no, you see the example. The example is prepared, verbally presented, weekly organizational statuses, briefings, reports to organization employees, managers, and executives. Utilize Microsoft PowerPoint to develop briefings and Microsoft Word to develop multiple white papers on equipment statuses written to the applicable level of audience. What is missing from this bullet?
The time that they did it, the amount of time that all these hours, I guess you would say.
Perfect. Yes, this example bullet is purposely missing the quantifiable metrics. What was improved by all this? How much? How long did it take? This bullet is missing the so what of why it was included in the resume. It is missing the results. All right, before we move on, any questions on specialized experience and using specialized experience to write your bullets?
Can you show us an example of how that would actually look the correct way, where it's quantifiable, like you stated, and how it affected?
I don't have that at hand. However, prepared.
Oh.
So one way. So preparing white papers. So what was improved? Prepared, verbally briefed, reports. So what were the reports? Reports on maybe equipment statuses, applicable level of audience. So what then? These reports were used to make for executives to make decisions, which resulted in an increase of, mission readiness of 57%, or from 10% to 57%, something like that.
Okay.
But again, I just used a lot of militaries in there. You may, and the veterans in the audience may know what military readiness is, equipment readiness, personnel readiness is, but a civilian HR person will not. So then you have to break down equipment readiness, what that equals, equipment available to utilize for future missions, etc.
Got it. Thank you.
No worries. Anybody else? But that's a great, Catherine, that's a great point. I'm going to actually write that down. And I will add a quantifiable metric on that just in case. So thank you for that. You have now made the future presentations better.
Ooh, can I add that to my resume?
Hey, why not? This is a national presentation, so absolutely. So next, we're going to discuss how your resume will be graded. Reading through the announcement, you were told something to the effect of, you will be evaluated on the basis of your level of competency in the following areas. These areas are also called competencies. Most announcements will be different, so these are only examples. Based on these competencies, what is the announcement looking for? What does the agency need? What do they want? Simple. Need to learn the definition. The Office of Personnel Management lists the definitions of their competencies in the FWCI Mosaic Competency Library found in the back of the OPM Federal Workforce Competency Initiative, or FWCI, Competency Handbook. Using this guide, you will find the meaning of the competencies that you will be graded against, so that you can use those definitions to help write your experience bullets and narratives and ensure you're showing how you meet the needs of the agency. This is one of those things that I do like about the federal government. Every federal agency uses this same set of definitions. So what problem solving means on one announcement in FEMA will be the same definition of what problem solving means in the housing and urban, an announcement for HUD, for instance. For this competency, the Mosaic Guide lists the definition as identifies problems, determines accuracy and relevance of information, uses sound judgment to generate and evaluate alternatives, and to make recommendations. So what could a bullet look like? Here, our imaginary applicant has included this bullet. Managed agency records and electronic files, determines proper classification, marking, storage, security, and destruction of materials in accordance with agency policy, identifies issues and problems that would result in disclosure of sensitive information, evaluated system and made changes to digital records SOP to ensure knowledge of data management principles were followed, generated recommendations for management to share best practices across the region. So, does our bullet match what the competency is looking for? Problem solving, identifies problems, determines accuracy and relevance of information, uses sound judgment to generate evaluations and alternatives, and to make recommendations. So does it? And with that, what are your questions about competencies? Euler, any questions about competencies?
No.
No, sir.
I have a question.
Go ahead. Was it Vivian?
Yes, says learning definition also managed. Okay. Native Americans, how do you do that when the resources are not there for them to have the competency once they're back on their reservation and they're applying for these positions? Their competency is basically they cannot implement competency, I guess, because in reality, these reservations are like 10 years behind technology. They're still catching up. A lot of them still don't have internet. A lot of them still don't have, simple basic things like water and electricity in their home. How would they buy and apply for these positions if they're on the reservation? How would we interpret that into these resumes?
I'm not sure what the ask is here. Is this just asking about the competency or how Native Americans on a reservation can apply to federal jobs?
That question, yes. I guess it's
That's
a hard.
that's not part of this presentation, and that is a rabbit hole I do not want to go down. But if and when they are able, if someone of Native American ancestry does need to or would like to work for the federal government, they actually have a special hiring authority in and of themselves where I have heard that they do not need to meet all of the qualifications necessarily needed if they are eligible for the special hiring authority for the Bureau of Indian Affairs specifically.
That is actually good information. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's information. But any other questions about competencies?
Is there like a website that you would recommend as like a trusted metrics and these statements that are stronger bullet points that you would recommend that we could, verify our resumes against for reference?
Honestly, USA Jobs and the announcement that you're applying to. Look at the specialized experience or competency they're asking for. Ask yourself, so what, so how, so why? So what does this have to do with your bullet have to do with the competency that's being asked for? So how does this strengthen your resume, or how does this equate to what the announcement is looking for? So why did you include it?
Got it. So you would say tailoring our resume to each specific position would, get us possibly the most success in these jobs.
I've stated before, you're going to need to tailor if you're using the same resume to apply to 2 different jobs, you're probably wrong. In fact, I'd say you're absolutely wrong. It doesn't matter if it's the same agency, the same position, and there's probably going to be some difference in specialized experience, competencies, things like that. So always tailor to the announcement you're applying to. And I'll give some tips and tricks on how to keep that from having to write an entirely new resume every time you apply here at the end of the presentation. All right, moving on. Next up, we'll discuss the assessment questionnaires. When applying, once you select your documents and resume in USA Jobs sends you to the agency site where you will fill out the assessment questionnaire. Assessment questionnaires are designed to measure expertise in job-related tasks and are used to screen and evaluate applicants. This assessment allows candidates to self-identify their relevant experience. These self-report questions are carefully developed to identify specific behaviors, education, and experience that will separate good candidates from great ones. This is another one of those things I made sure to emphasize during my presentations. When I went through my transition classes in 2020, I too retired from the Army in 2021 after 24 years of experience, 24 years in the service. I don't remember hearing anything about the need to tailor my resume to the announcement and the assessment questionnaire. Only the need to tailor to the announcement, which is why many of my early resumes were found not to be qualified. But how can you tailor if you don't see the questions until you apply? Well, and if you didn't know this, most announcements include a link that allows you to preview the assessment questionnaires prior to applying. These are a couple of examples of how to preview the assessment questionnaire taken directly from USA Jobs. Up front, most assessment questionnaires are different. What we will go over here are some examples taken from USA Jobs recently. Here's an example of some of the questions you will be answering and what they look like. Remember what I said about a test? Another example of a format you may find. This example requires you to select everything you have experience with that is applicable to the job you're applying for. If you select something, guess where else that information needs to be? That's right, in your resume. There are several other ways that the assessment questionnaire will ask you about your experience. Some will ask you to input examples. Others will ask for dates and job titles. Remember, you have to include everything the announcement and assessment questionnaire are looking for in your resume. Assessment questionnaires are also called self-assessments. This is where you get to select how well you think you qualify for the job. So here's one. By a quick show of virtual hands, who has heard that no matter what, you should always choose expert or the highest rating possible? About to blow some minds. Well, that is another myth. Fact, if you inflate your qualifications and or experience, meaning your resume doesn't support the answers that you put on the assessment questionnaire, you may be removed from consideration for the position. At a minimum, your self-assessment will be downgraded and your resume may be put at the back of the pile. And of course, now the HR specialist is annoyed because you overinflated your rating, causing them more work and or preventing someone who may have been qualified from making the cut. Probably not a good idea. So make sure you rate yourself accurately and honestly.
I have a question. Can you briefly go right back to where you find the assessment questionnaire again, please?
There's several different places.
Okay.
So preview questions, staffing, the link will usually have something like usastaffing.gov view questionnaire. You know, this last numbers to this specific announcement and will be different. And then here's another example right here.
Okay. And you complete that before to get an idea, or you said there was something where
You can use,
have to do afterwards?
Yes, you can use this to tailor your resume to the announcement and the supplemental questionnaire before going through before selecting apply.
Okay. Thank you.
From here, we're going to go over an example of what should be reflected in your resume based on your self-assessment selection. Again, this isn't the only way to do it, nor is this the only format questions come in. Bottom line, no matter what the assessment questionnaire is asking for, your resume must reflect the answer you select. So let's think about this question. Researching, analyzing, and developing reports, data tools, and providing training and leadership. Based on the question above, let's see ways your resume should look based on potential answers. For this format of question, you have 5 choices. A, I have not had education, training, or experience in performing this task. B, I have had education or training in how to perform this task, but have not yet performed it on the job. C, I have performed this task on the job under close supervision by a supervisor or senior employee. D, I have performed this task as a regular part of my job independently and usually without review by a supervisor or senior employee. E, the task has been a major part of my work. I am highly skilled at performing this task and have supervised or trained others in performance of this task, and or others have consulted me as an expert for assistance. Since it's unlikely if you select A or B, you'll be determined as qualified for a position, we're going to jump right to C. What I like about the federal resume is that the agency is giving you the answers to the test. Like the specialized experience, the agency is telling you how to write your experience. Here, we can see that this person has some experience, but not a ton. But they do use the terms from the selection to help craft their bullet. When conducting your self-assessment, don't be afraid to pick this selection if it's accurate. If you find that you self-selected out of the running, maybe the job wasn't right for you, or maybe you can go back and fix your resume to make sure you meet the requirements and the level that the assessment questionnaire is asking for. Here, we have even more detail and context. You'll see some words from the assessment questionnaire selection also used in the bullet. Finally, the expert. How could this bullet look? What should this bullet read like? How about this? Notice that the examples are getting longer and longer. That's what detail and context looks like. Again, you are not just stating that you're an expert or that people came to you for advice on the assessment questionnaire. You are stating in your resume that people came to you for advice, which allows you to select the expert on the questionnaire. I don't know how better to foot stomp this other than this. If you're not sure about what to select, select the next lower choice. That way, if the HR reviewer sees you are more qualified, they can and will increase your self-rating without penalty to you. If you select something and it turns out that it was too low and you self-selected out of the process, then the job may not have been meant for you, or you need to go back and adjust your resume to reflect the proper answer. Applicants overinflating their ratings then requires additional work on the parts of the HR staffs and is part of why the federal hiring process takes so long. And that statement is actually from several federal HR reviewers and specialists that I worked with on this presentation. Are there any questions about the assessment questionnaire and how to write and draft your bullets to meet the requirements? No hands, no one coming off mute. All right, moving on. Now, moving on to the additional and/or optional sections. We start off with the awards section, which are good to include if you have the room, but again, they are not required. But up front, even if you include an awards section, make sure you include a statement about any awards or decorations you received in the applicable experience section in which you received them. This will give your experience not only more context and detail, but it is also a solid, quantifiable metric of how good of a job you did. This is how you push your resume beyond just meeting the minimum qualifications. A quick note, awards aren't the same as performance evaluation ratings. Be aware that some agencies consider performance evaluations ratings, specifically federal performance evaluation ratings, as PII and will remove your resume from consideration if you include them. Always read the entire announcement. You also need to pay attention to the announcement to ensure you know whether or not references should or need to be included in your resume. Even if they are not required, I personally like to include at least 3 professional references when I apply. Why? As part of the hiring process, a federal agency has to speak to at least 3 references. By including the references from the start, agency partners have told me that they can continue the hiring process without having to wait for you to get them the information. It may only take a day or 2 off the process, but I know I'm a fan as much as cutting as much time out of the process wherever and whenever I can. For our veterans and transitioning service members on the call, I've built a robust military to civilian translation guide that is available on LinkedIn. If you can't find it or would like to contribute, I'll make sure Audrey has a copy, but feel free to email me and I will email you a copy as well. While this is focused on military to civilian translation, again, it is important to understand that jargon exists in all federal, state, and local agencies and organizations. And what one agency calls a task or process could be called something completely different in another. That's why it's important, even for my current federal employees, that you write your resume in a clear, easy to understand terms to the agency you're applying to. Here are just some examples from our guide for our veterans. We've all heard it, and I've said it here several times. Your resume must be written in language that the HR resume reviewer understands. And I apologize, I got a frog in my throat. My allergies are kicking my 6 out here in California. The person reviewing your resume probably has no idea what the job is looking for, only what they are told to review. And the likelihood that of the HR reviewer understanding what you did in the military is probably in the less than 1% range. This is why resumes must clearly state how you meet the qualifications for the position in terms the HR reviewers and managers understand. Again, some examples. Right up top, military experience is experience. The Army, Navy, and USMC are not federal departments or agencies. However, the Department of Defense, the Department of the Army, and the Department of the Navy or Air Force are. Military occupational specialties, those are career fields, duties, specialties. A mission is nothing more than a project, task, or challenge. Some more examples from the guide. NCOs, no one knows what an NCO is on the federal side. They're managers, team leaders, first line supervisors. NCOICs, supervisors, senior team chief, junior officers, project officers, administrators, program directors. This bottom one is one of my favorites. Close air support, CAS. This is a question to you all. I'd like to hear some thoughts. What could be a way to translate this very specific military term into something a federal HR specialist understands? Anyone want to take a crack at it? No?
Say again.
So how would you translate this? Communication specialist. All right, there you go. That's a good one, Steve. What if you have experience with close air support or called close air support or were part of a close air support TAC controller or pilot? How would you explain that in your federal resume?
Air traffic control.
Traffic controller, yes, I was thinking that too.
There you go. But again, that's a air traffic controller is a position. But what did you do? What is this? What is close air support?
Aviation administrative manager.
I like it. I like it. What about this? Oh, I jumped ahead. What about customer service? Let's look at the definition. Some of you may laugh. Definition of customer service is works with clients and customers, that is, any individuals who use or receive the services or products that your work unit produces, including the general public, individuals who work in the agency, other agencies or organizations outside the government, to assess their needs, provide information or assistance, resolve their problems, or satisfy their expectations, knows about available products and services, is committed to providing quality products and services. It seems like this translation hits pretty close to home, especially from my time in Iraq. Close air support absolutely solved some of my problems. So again, think outside the box a little bit when discussing and thinking about how your military experience translates into civilian terms. You would be surprised at how broad and wide-ranging your experience actually is. As we get closer to the end of our presentation, I'd like to add these closing tips and reminders. Your resume should only include relevant information that is relevant to the announcement and supplemental assessment questionnaire you are applying for. If it's not in your resume and clearly reflects what the agency is looking for, then you didn't do it. Context matters. Explain what you did, how you did it, and if it made a difference. Your resume must be clear. Human resources reviewers will not make any assumptions about your experience or your time or hours worked. Again, if it's not in your resume, it didn't happen. For every resume bullet or narrative in your resume, ask yourself, so what? Why did you include this information? What is its purpose? How does it strengthen your resume and or reflect the specialized experience the announcement is looking for? What was the outcome or result? Again, if it's not in your resume, then it didn't happen. This is the question earlier on. I recommend you create one master resume as a foundation and then tailor copies of that resume for each announcement. A master resume allows you to put everything, all of your experiences, no matter the job series, MOS, background, etc., into one spot. And then from there, you tailor it and take off everything that's not relevant, which then cuts hours off the tailoring time. Next, avoid jargon. And this isn't, again, just for the vets. This is also important for current federal employees who are trying to transfer agencies or applying for a position in a different career field. Next, use acronyms sparingly, if at all, and be sure to spell them out at least once. Your resume should go back as far as you need to go in order to show you have the experience and qualifications the announcement is looking for. Finally, find a mentor, pick their brain. There are some great private organizations out there, and LinkedIn is a great place to find those in the industry or agency you are interested in. For the veterans, when it comes to federal job applications, veterans preference and special hiring authorities are two separate things and serve two different purposes. So I want everybody to take a minute real quick. I need everybody to pay attention to this. So do me a favor. If you're listening, if you're paying attention, please select the raise hand button, because this is one of the most important things I will speak to you today about federal hiring. All right, so everybody rogering up. Got a couple lagging. All right, cool. There's enough. All right, so veterans preference gives eligible veterans preference and appointment over many other applicants. In the competitive service, which is what the federal system is called, so if you ever hear competitive service, that's basically federal hiring. When agencies use a numerical ratings and ranking system to determine the best qualified applicants for a position, an additional 5 or 10 points are added to the numerical score of qualified preference eligible veterans. Veterans preference does not guarantee a veteran a job, and it does not apply to internal agency actions such as promotions, transfers, reassignments, and reinstatements, or when a veteran applies using the Veterans Employment Opportunity Act, or VEOA, which I will touch on in a moment. Special hiring authorities are also known as hiring paths. They help the federal government hire individuals that represent our diverse society. These special hiring authorities can be used to give you a head start when applying. It's best to think of each of these paths as a route to the hiring manager. If you're serious about securing your dream job, a promotion, or a federal career, you want to make sure your resume is on as many of those paths as possible to increase your chances of being hired. Special hiring authorities include veteran-specific paths like the Veterans Recruitment Appointment, or VRA, and the 30% or more disabled veteran authority, as well as other hiring authorities for recent graduates, individuals with disabilities, or the Schedule A hiring authority, authorities for military spouses, as well as authorities for Peace Corps and AmeriCorps alumni. Before we get into the non-competitive authorities, I want to touch on the limitations of one authority in particular, the Veterans Employment Opportunity Act of 1998, or the VEOA. The definition of the VEOA is a special hiring authority which gives eligible veterans access to positions that otherwise may only have been available to current competitive service federal employees. In VEOA appointments, preference eligibles and veterans are not given preference, but they are allowed to compete for job opportunities that are not offered to other external candidates. This means that even though veterans and active duty service members aren't technically considered federal employees, the VEOA allows us to compete for jobs that are only open to current federal employees. What you need to be aware of is that using the VEOA typically means your resume will almost always get referred, no matter what, even if you only barely meet the minimum qualifications. This should be a good thing, right? No, it is not. When I started applying for federal jobs, seeing my resume referred kept me from realizing that my resume was not what the agency and HR professionals were looking for. So I kept using my burnt garbage resume to apply and get referred, apply and get referred, apply and get referred, apply and get referred. It wasn't until I took the time to actually dig into my resume, take a look at what agencies actually wanted to see, that I realized that the VEOA only allowed me to compete with current and former federal employees for the positions. It didn't offer me any preference or entitle me to the job, which of course is right there in the VEOA verbiage on OPM's site. Even if you are eligible for and use the VEOA, your resume still needs to be on point, meet all of the qualifications required by the announcement and assessment questionnaire, and show that you are the best qualified candidate for the position. You are still competing for the position. The VEOA isn't a shortcut for veterans. It's just an opportunity. So for those who keep getting referred and have been using the VEOA but haven't been getting interviews, this might be why. Back to the special hiring authorities, some of which are known as non-competitive hiring authorities. Using one of these authorities means anyone who meets the minimum eligibility qualifications for a position can be selected so long as they qualify for one of the applicable hiring authorities. The San Francisco Federal Executive Board and Veterans Employment Collaborative have helped more than 150 people get hired to positions that didn't even have open announcements on USA Jobs, using the individuals with disabilities and the 30% or more disabled veteran hiring authorities. I want to focus on these two for a moment. While the Schedule A and 30% or more disabled veteran hiring authorities may look similar, they are different. The 30% or more disabled veteran authority allows an agency to non-competitively appoint any veteran with a 30% or more service-connected disability. You are eligible if you have separated from the active duty military service with a service-connected disability rating of 30% or more, or have a rating by the Department of Veterans Affairs showing a compensable service-connected disability of 30% or more. Sounds great, but for those transitioning service members who are on the call, who might be on, this authority can only be used once you're out of the service and have been actually granted a disability rating, and not for applications you might be submitting while you're within your last 120 days. Now let's talk about the Schedule A hiring authority. You are eligible for the Schedule A if you're a person with a severe physical disability, psychiatric disability, or intellectual disability. Now, I know many of us shy away from using terms like disabled or persons with disabilities when we refer to ourselves, but will you or have you submitted a VA claim for a service-connected disability? When you look at what the U.S. Office of Personnel Management considers a person with severe physical disability, psychiatric disability, or intellectual disability, and compare that to what you've submitted to the VA or have in your medical records, they often match. Don't know if your conditions would qualify you for a Schedule A? Do a web search for the standard form or SF 256. This is OPM's self-identification of disability form. If you see a condition listed anywhere on that form, and you have that condition diagnosed in your medical records, then you're probably eligible. To show Schedule A eligibility, you will need a Schedule A letter, which can be signed by your treating physician, a physical therapist, or even a Department of Veterans Affairs vocational rehabilitation counselor. For those of you on active duty and your care goes through a military treatment facility, they can sign the letters as well. Feel free to reach out to me or the medical leadership of David Grant Medical Center, Travis Air Force Base, with questions, or if your local facility refuses to sign your Schedule A letter. Bottom line is, I've already gone to war twice, almost got a full colonel relief because they refused to do these, and they should. So I don't have any problem standing on a colonel's desk. I am the saltiest retired 03 you've ever met. This concludes the resume development portion of our webinar. Your feedback is important to make future webinars even more effective. Please take a moment and go to our after event survey using either the link shown here or by scanning the top QR code. Below that, you will see my contact information. You can use the POPL or POPL QR code to add all of this information right to your personal device. Feel free to shoot me any additional comments on how you thought the presentation went, but please make sure this is in addition to the comments you make in the survey. I do have to report the survey comments up. With that, what are your questions? Awesome. Thank you for that, Catherine. Appreciate that. All right. So let me come over here. All right. We'll start at the top. Steven, what do you got?
Hey, Brock, thanks. I don't have any questions right now, but I would like a copy of the jargon to civilian translation. This has been informative. I had always thought shorter better, even though I typically prefer more detail in length. So this has been very informative in that, and I'll get to work reformatting everything. So thank you, Brock.
No problem. And for that, for everybody on the call requesting a copy of that, I believe, Audrey, I sent that a copy to you already. If not, I will send it. I will send that and a copy of. Actually, I'll send just all of my information, all of the resources I usually send out for federal resume development to Audrey, so she can send it directly to everybody because she has your email addresses.
Yep, absolutely. And I also have potentially even a additional documentation for more military translation from what you did to what a civilian would think that is. So I can send all that information, absolutely, as well as the recording for the session today.
Awesome. Actually, Audrey, can we kill the recording just to let everybody feel a little bit more comfortable to ask questions?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right.